ought to know. Nate said, well, they should form a band, take them on tour throughout the...
Are we good?
We're live.
Okay. Hello, and welcome to the Mercenaries of Mischief, a very special panel about homebrew. I, as always, am your benevolent Dungeon Master, Puck. I am also known as Sean, but today I will be manning a discussion about homebrew with all these incredibly talented and popular people. And really, it's a privilege. I never thought I would be here. And I'd like to start off by thanking our sponsor, Hero Forge, for hooking us up with a giveaway for this. We'll be doing that giveaway at the end. You have to be ticketed for the event to be eligible for the giveaway. You also need to be over 16 years of age, and you need to be a resident of USA
18.
or Canada. 18 years of age. You need to be a resident of USA or Canada, excluding Quebec. Nothing we can do about that. Them's rules. All right. Now then, we're going to start off with some introductions. People are going to tell us about a little bit about their homebrew philosophy, and then everybody's got a little different point of view for how they do homebrews and their influences and experiences with it. We're going to go through all that today. And since I'm already talking, we'll start with me. I am Puck. I am the Dungeon Master for the Mercenaries of Mischief, this channel here. I do 2 shows a week, the Mercenaries of Mischief and Too Many Warlocks. They're homebrew stories in the same world, 2 teams for the same organization that affect each other by like taking the cart out, and then it's like, oh, now we have no cart, now we got to walk. And other more involved, more difficult things that I'm certain happen along the road. I have been DMing things for a very long time, about, I want to say 15 years, and I have been DMing professionally for about 10. So I've run my own games cafe, and I got started on this channel because I met some incredible people, and we made a thing, and turns out people like it. And going from there, I would like to hand it over to Pumpkinberry. Please
Hi.
tell us about you.
Sure. I'm Pumpkinberry, or PB. I think maybe the newer GM in the Twitch sphere here in this group. I've been jamming for an audience for 2 years now, I think, over on Tablestory. And I do a lot of weird games, I think, horror, and I'm doing a surreal thriller right now. And my philosophy is kind of, I don't know, it's in line with the panel, which is to write stories or tell stories for the people that are at your table. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
All right. Emily, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Emily Rose Jacobson. I also go by G Emily on Hyper RPG. That's where I've been a big GM presence on for a while. I was the GM of the official Rat Queens RPG, in addition to the Witcher RPG that we teamed up with our Tablestory Games with. I've done a bunch of one-shots here and there. I've also been in Swords and Sorcery, the improvised campaign. That was an improvised D&D show back on Geek and Sundry back in the day. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm so excited to talk about some homebrew storytelling, since I've never really played. I started creating stories, never really played a module, so I'm really stoked for this.
And last but not least, Brad.
Definitely least.
You can say least.
Tell
It's
us.
fine. It's okay. I get it.
Look, you guys can have fun. I'm over here, like, on the hierarchy, I know where I stand. Okay, Brad, please.
I know where I am too. Don't worry. We should just let these two speak. We'll just be quiet.
It's okay. Let's go hang out, Brad. You want to go coffee or something?
Yeah, we'll go get a coffee. We'll leave all the professional GMing questions to you guys. Yeah, I am a professional GM. Apparently. I'm kind of relatively new as well. I think in general, when it comes to GMing, I only started about 5 years ago. And I'm ancient, so it's kind of I'm actually 63. I know I look pretty good for it, but I started GMing at 58, and all I've ever done is GM online. So I've only ever done shows online. I've not really ever GM'd anything at an actual table with any real people because I don't have any real friends. And I have been pretty much exclusively running homebrew stuff forever. I tried running a module once, and within 2 weeks or something, I was already hacking it and changing it and turned it into my own thing. So yeah, pretty much the same philosophy as PB. I like to just tell stories and provide some sort of collaborative story with the people at the table. So the experience over the last 5 years has been great, but I also feel like I'm still kind of new. Like everyone's always said to me that they're like, oh, I've got a 20-year campaign running, and I'm like, oh wow, that's so cool. I don't know what the dice do. But yeah, at one point I ended up starting Tablestory with my friend Brotato, which PB is now a part of and co-running with myself and Wax Steven. So we've been running games over at Tablestory for a couple of years now, and that's just pretty much where we do our thing. And it's been really fun. Mostly I GM D&D. I've dabbled in a few other things, but I'm a D&D kid.
All right. Thank you so much, Brad. So we're going to start with some discussions. And first up on the agenda, PB is going to talk to us with her experience in homebrewing, the most difficult homebrew subject of all, in my opinion, horror. And I'll hand it over to PB.
You just set the expectation there. So you definitely got my heart rate going, which is what you should be doing as a GM of horror. So great job.
This is now a horror one-shot for PB.
Yeah, that's what's happening right now. All the worst things that can go down. So I do think that tension and expectation is probably one of the better tools that you can use as a GM of horror. So I think that for me, obviously communication with your players is paramount. So the first thing that you need to do is get a group together that actually wants to play a horror game. In my opinion, never should you just, we're sitting down to play D&D and then spring on them that it's a horror game. And then, so once you have the players that actually are interested in exploring kind of the dark areas or a horror game, then you can say, well, this is the type of horror game that I'm thinking of playing. And is everybody okay with that? And then kind of like watch what people talk about and joke about, and then kind of like make notes of what they're telling you that they're afraid of. And then you can use those things. Luckily, I've just had really great groups of players that are willing to go into really crazy dark places with each other. And I think in all of the campaigns that I've done, actually, we all become pretty close afterwards. And it lends to that kind of like being vulnerable and letting the game be really intense. Because I think with horror games, you have to have, you as a GM also have to be willing to be vulnerable with your players, and they have to be vulnerable with you and with each other. Otherwise, no one's really going to allow themselves to get scared. Because I think in general, role playing, people sometimes sit down at the table and they're kind of like, oh, I'll do this thing and I'll like role play a meme character, but I'm not going to really get into character, and I'm not going to be vulnerable with the other players. We're never going to have a moment that's like, I'm so overwhelmed by the cool thing that happened. Tears are welling in my eyes, that kind of thing, because they don't want to look stupid. And that's just people in general. Nobody wants to look like an idiot. So I think making sure everybody feels safe in the beginning, like in the planning stages, is really important, so that they're willing to kind of allow themselves to get scared is good. And then music, ambience is really important. I find when I did do a horror game at a table, I'd lower the lights. I'd have music going in the background. We had a couple candles going because setting that tone was really important, because you have to. We talked about this a little bit before, I think, when on our call, but you have to remember that a lot of people for horror, they're expecting a visual component, and you don't have that really as a GM, especially in an online environment. You may have artwork, but it's 2D, it's not moving, it's not going to jump out at the players. So you you can't be building a campaign around jump scares, but you can be using things like audio and descriptions and leaving blanks so that the players fill in their worst nightmare. You do a little bit of a description, but not all of it, and let them go crazy with what they think they see. And then the tension will rise at the table. Yeah, and pacing. That's probably the third big thing I think about running horror, is that you have to make sure that there's a break. You have to let that tension rise for a little bit, let a thing happen, let them kind of laugh it off, or let the game go in a different direction for a little while. And then it's constantly a game of just pulling people up and then letting them kind of cool down a little bit. And then when you see it, you just pull them right back up. That's just kind of the job. I think for horror GMs, you have to really, it's all in the details, I guess. It's like the audio, it's the tension, it's the pacing, and it's paying attention. It's paying attention to the players, and when they're intrigued by what you're saying, and then when they're scared by what you're saying or the situation, and watching them feed off of each other. Sometimes the best thing you can do is roll for no reason, and they'll freak out. So it's like little stuff like that where you ask them to roll and you don't tell them why. And then they're like, oh my God, and they're already thinking of the worst. Why are they having me roll? Just little stuff like that, I think. And then let them, go around and play, and then weave the story around them. So yeah, that's me. And I think that's my rundown of kind of the major points of GMing horror. I hope that was succinct. Thanks.
Very informative. That is, look, I was, while you were talking, I'm like, there's probably some stuff I could maybe ask about to clarify it.
Please.
That was really
please,
good. No,
please,
you did a great job. I got nothing else to add.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I can't believe we have to follow that. That's
No. Emily,
What?
you're a theater person.
I'm gonna pass out.
This is a fact.
You're a theater person.
Yes.
And that experience in theater has helped you with your home brewing. Please tell us more about that.
So I am a BFA theater performance major, and for me, I grew up kind of in a conservative home in a conservative part of Texas. Never really got into D&D tabletop RPGs until in college, when I kind of stumbled upon the revelation that D&D and tabletop RPGs aren't just games, but it's group storytelling. It's a bunch of people sitting at a table working together to tell a story. And as someone who majored in telling stories, that is what really, really drew me to want to be a GM, to want to play in more RPGs and whatnot. So I bring, if you watch my streams more, if you know me, I am such a huge proponent for improv in tabletop RPG settings, especially improv training and bringing improv skills, not only for GMs, but for players. I worked at an improvised theater company for about 4 years. I created a show called Oregon Trail Uncharted, which was a live action version of the Oregon Trail video game with improv and game elements.
Oh my God.
And like I said earlier, we did Swords and Sorcery, the improvised campaign, where Tom Lommel, if you've seen Saving Throw, he's been a GM and DM on that show. He would come in with a new adventure every week, not tell us what it is, but we would improvise with the actors on stage along with the dungeon master to tell stories. So I've always come from this very creative, don't do anything by the book. I'll pull ideas from books, but yeah, I don't think I've ever done a straight campaign out of a book, which I know is very like what? But to me, that's just how I was brought up as a tiny tabletop RPG child, still a youngling in this world. So with that, back to improv, I believe it is so important for not only the GM to say yes and to the players, but for the players to say yes and to the GM. Yes and is such a great statement. You don't have to say it verbatim, but agreeing to what the GM is giving you is awesome. And then the GM agreeing to what you're also giving them. That creates such a harmonious place on the table, and that creates a space for richer and deeper storytelling, where just everyone's communicating. Because I've seen games, and I've heard from friends who were playing in games where suddenly a character is like, no, my character wouldn't do that. and like if you reach that point, it's totally fine, but there's better ways of like saying, hey, I think instead my character does this. And so as a GM, you're like, yes, or other way around. Like if you as a GM are like, no, you're not going that way, you're going this way. There are much more creative ways to instill that and say yes and to your characters while bringing your story to the table. Another big thing for homebrew storytelling for me is helping or hindering. When you're creating a homebrew campaign for the players at your table, I love to ask my players, what is your character's what is your character's objective, but like, what is their heart goal? So a character's objective can be, I want to slay this dragon. That's great. We can totally achieve that. But what is your character's like heart goal? Because it's not slaying that dragon. It's, I need to slay this dragon so my reputation can be saved, or I need to show these people that I can protect them, or I need to win back the love I have in my life, or I need to prove to myself that I'm worthy of some kind of goodness in this world. So by taking that core kind of character element, I'm able to craft scenarios, I'm able to improvise things on the spot that will either help the character achieve that goal or hinder that character's achievement of that goal. Because that's where you create stakes, and that's where you create kind of like this tension and great involvement, is when you say, great, I know what you want. I'm either going to give it to you right now, or you know what? You don't get to get that right now. We're going to pull on those strings. We're going to pull on that tension, and just through those means really create dynamic storytelling moments for your characters. You don't have to have a ton of experience to do that. It's just knowing what the characters and the players at your table want and using that in your story in like little moments and big moments. And it is so, so rewarding. And then finally, a thing I did throughout the entire Rat Queens RPG, because that was my first big kind of chapter campaign, my first big campaign that had several different chapters in it. And so for me as a GM, I love looking at the media that I really like and taking inspiration from those media sources. So like, I'm a huge fan of heist casino movies. I love them. I think they're great. So of course the Rat Queens RPG had a whole entire Vegas casino fantasy heist chapter, because I've found that if you as a GM are loving something that you're creating, your players will also feel that energy and get excited and want to play in that space with you. And especially like if you're creating something where like, I love casino heist movies, so I'm gonna have like, these are the 3 different hotels and these are the characters you're gonna meet there, and here's like the aesthetics and here's the music you hear. Because if you're so truly passionate about it, you're going to flesh out all these amazing details, create all these great moments, and also just know your world so that you can improvise on the spot. Because as GMs, we've all been there where you just have to improvise, and being familiar and comfortable and loving your world so much helps that improv process so much more.
I'm totally stealing heart goal. I just want you to know that up front.
It's so much less creepy than what's your motive.
Yeah, what's
like,
your motive?
Much less existential than what's your purpose.
Yeah, what is my purpose?
Oh man.
Oh, God.
Speaking of purpose.
Oh dear God.
Brad, you came into homebrewing as a bit of a freshman
Yes.
to the whole tabletop gaming scene. Please tell us about your experiences in 20
I
minutes or less.
just I just like the way that the dice sound when they go clack clack clack, and that's really
That's
it.
good.
That's all I really can bring
good
to it
sound.
now. It is a good sound. I think I agree with every single point that these guys have made up to the point when I started speaking, and now I'm probably going to undo everything that everyone has said, because I just
believe
feel
in
like
you.
the same way pretty much. I come from like a production background, so like post-production mostly, editing. I kind of have worked in studios a lot. So watching shows or movies or any sort of scripted content be made is one thing, and then watching somebody roll a dice and just completely destroy all the tropes or any like subconscious things that you might have written into a screenplay, and then they roll a 1 or a 20 or something, is so interesting to me. It's crazy. I love it. So I didn't really know what D&D was too much. I kind of knew what it was. I had played a terrible game of it before where the GM didn't really want any role play, or no, they didn't not want any role play. Nobody did any role play is a better way to put it. So it was just kind of like a board game, and I was like, well, that's okay, but I'll just go carry on playing Magic in the corner instead. And then many years later on, I was watching a Twitch show by Koibu, the GM, and I was like, what are these guys doing? This is crazy. And I was super interested in it. And I went and grabbed a GM and started to run a show immediately on what was a very fledgling Twitch channel of mine back then, just somewhere to put it. And I kind of just wanted to give it a go as well. And since I was very interested in the production side of things, I thought, oh, how could I do this myself? And I didn't run a module. I just kind of came up with a story, the classic, I'm going to write a book, and then you're going to be this character and this character, kind of. And then I was like, well, what am I interested in? What are my influences in life? I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan, so I kind of attempted to... I looked at the stuff that was in that game that I enjoyed. One of the things that I think is really strong in Final Fantasy games are like the story, the presentation of the story, but the fact that it's always being told kind of through these characters and their perspectives and stuff. So it lends itself really well to D&D, I think, because everyone at the table is their main character in their head, including you as a GM with your story and your lore and all that stuff. So I really wanted to just try and figure out a way to blend all these things. So I kind of came up with a story. I sat down and went, let's just see what comes of this thing. I'm going to make my own Final Fantasy game, kind of, and then present it. And much like what Emily was saying, just making sure that it's very much yes and. I'm a big fan of like just handing stuff out. I'm a sucker for overpowering my characters because I'm like, yeah, you get the Buster Sword and it's way too strong, have it, because it's cool. And there's no restrictions to tabletop games, to D&D and stuff. There's no reason to have an invisible wall like an MMO. You know, you can do anything. It's all in your head. It's a creative kind of imaginative process. So I very often just kind of go, yes, do that because that's way cooler. I've had characters do all sorts of insane things just because it's fun. Do a triple backflip over a moving train. I'm like, yeah, roll the dice, you know, see what happens and away it goes. So one of the things that I think I enjoy personally is just being able to stretch a sort of creative muscle, apply some of that production quality to it. Because I've only ever run things online for an audience as much as my players, kind of. Things like what PB was saying with music, I commissioned immediately an OST, kind of like how you get with like a Final Fantasy, you know, like the music's cool, they have like a battle theme and stuff. I thought that would be really interesting to give it a kind of familial feeling. And just kind of tried to facilitate a story that we could all tell that allowed me to stretch a creative muscle myself rather than like studying a module that has been released and kind of trying to learn things, which I'm not very good at. Yeah, I get to stretch my own creative muscle. And also every player gets to tell their story in the way that you might find with one of those like JRPGs or something where there's a cast and an ensemble of different characters that are all kind of important and the main character in a way. There isn't always a direct main character in those things. I think that's a good thing to think when you're sat at the table. And then, yeah, just spoiling them with stuff to make them overpowered so they break my game. And then just, it really is just kind of an attempt for everyone to enjoy themselves and just have a few hours of escapism and, you know, have fun. So that's just really all I'm trying to facilitate a lot of the time. But I do it in a very, you know, kind of non-traditional way. Unorthodox, you know. I'm not really too stuck on the rules. One of the other elements, I guess, of homebrewing is just the rules. I have a lot of homebrew elements that are just like, yeah, that's not the rules, but it's so much cooler that you do it this way, so go for it. And that is something that I, you know, is often a point of contention sometimes. People will be like, well, you can't do that. That's the wrong rule. And, you know, some people are like, that was really awesome, that scene. But as long as I see sort of the players are enjoying themselves and try and facilitate everybody having fun, then that's the kind of the aim, I think.
Yeah,
for me.
just gonna hop in here because I don't think a single player has ever said you can't do that. That's not the rules. Your players are always like, "Man, that's so awesome! Thank you." It's the people watching that are like, "Actually, no, he can't do that."
Yeah,
I've
and
never
I
had
like,
a player not think that
I
I was
love
super
that.
badass.
And it's just fun for me, like the kid that got to play Final Fantasy when I was 14 just gets to make one. And that's fun for me as well. So you've got to make sure that you're having fun, which I think, to the point that Emily was making as well, is another thing. When you're a GM, it is good to ensure that you're having fun too. Everyone's having fun at the table. It's not just kind of a struggle almost, or a tug of war between multiple different elements. And sometimes it's a balance, and you have to spin all those plates, when you're GMing and you're doing all these millions of things. And you can see two players and you're like, well, that one wants to do that and that one wants to do that, and then you have to strike a balance.
Yeah,
and
it's
stuff.
not your story, it's our story.
I'm
a huge fan of that.
Yeah,
huge fan of that.
I think that is so important. And if you can work on that and master that, it doesn't really matter whether you're homebrewing a thing or you're making stuff up on the fly, or you've planned everything meticulously. If your main thing is just to make sure that everyone's having fun, and make sure that you're included in that as well, because you can get bogged down in trying to make everyone happy at the table, can make you feel like you're not having fun, and that's also important. And like Emily was saying, you've got to tell your story without it being a book.
Yes.
Kind of. But yeah, I don't know. There you go. I spoke for too long.
There's also this kind of a subset, I think, of GMs that feel like it should be the GM versus the player, which it sounds like everybody here at the table is not kind of a fan of that GM style. We're all very much and we're doing this as a group.
Classic, orthodox GM style, isn't it?
I like to make an evil face whenever they run into a thing I've planned or they roll very poorly. I like to put on that kind of persona where it's like, welcome to my world. You're this, come on, you're going to try this. Okay. But like, that's that's just like a persona. It's totally not like.
It's immersion building.
Yeah, I'm playing the game to make sure that like you are also having fun and you're doing things that you like.
Villain.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I'm going to take a controversial stance. Like, DMs, when you go into the game with the idea that is you versus the player, you are breaking players for future DMs, and then we have to rehabilitate them. This is and I guess I'll segue into what I was going to talk about. So, I mean, like, my first encounter with tabletop RPGs, I think I was like 10 years old, and my cousin started up a pen and paper D6 Marvel RPG with my family. And I was like, this is incredible. What is even happening here? This is like a comic book come to life. And after I had determined that my cousin was not, in fact, a wizard and that anybody could do this, I started doing it on my own, because at first it was just begging him, "Oh, could you please run this? I want to do this with my friends. Could you please do it?" Because of course I assumed he had to have some kind of qualification. There was likely a course or something that needed to be, some official stamp that was required to engage in this kind of activity.
Find a real wizard on a coast.
Exactly.
And have him
like,
sign
I
your
needed an
document.
Obi-Wan or something to teach me.
But
after I realized that it was just making shit up and just doing stuff, I got together with my friends in high school, and we just rolled 6-sided dice, had loose character sheets on lined paper that basically meant nothing, and told stories. And so in a way, I was homebrewing before I even knew what it was. And then later in life, after I'd gotten the books and I had learned D&D and I'd learned what it was, I started my own games cafe. And I started hiring myself out to go to parties and run D&D games when I couldn't run them for my friends and this kind of thing. And really, I always kind of ran my games based on the tables that I had. because I've been DMing almost exclusively for strangers for almost 10 years now. So you get, your players will tell you the kind of game they want to play very early on. And a great quote about it is Mike Krahulik from Penny Arcade said, being a GM is a lot like preparing a meal for friends. And you wouldn't serve vegetarian to your meat-loving friends, and you wouldn't serve a rack of ribs to your vegetarian friends. And in the same way, you wouldn't build a murder hobo campaign for your roleplay friends, and you wouldn't build a roleplay campaign for your murder hobo friends. So, I mean, everybody has their grand story that they want to tell. Everybody has their epic, you know, oh, I want to tell this grand scale. If you have this solid, unbreaking narrative, I'm not going to tell you not to run it. But if you do, run it with friends that know it's important to you. Otherwise, you need to have a more fluid. You need to have something that's going to work with the people that you're with, because you're, in the end, like all these incredible people have said, you're not telling this story on your own. You're telling it with everybody else at the table. Everybody is going to add and take away pieces of their own story, of their own experiences with it. They're going to change your world. There was a, you know, back in ancient times, there was a gaming magazine, and they were doing an article about how somebody was visiting the QA studios back when they were making Halo 2. And they were talking about how, oh, one of the players in the multiplayer match during the QA testing was running across a wall that he shouldn't have been up there. And one of the QA testers said, that's what happens when you let people into your world.
Mm-hmm.
They look for ways to do whatever they want to do in it.
Yeah.
And you have to be prepared for those things as a GM. You have to be prepared to shape and mold your world around the narrative the players are giving you. It's not always about you. It has to be about them as well. Otherwise, you just hop on the train and away you go.
Yeah, right. But the thing I like about that as well is that, like, I think you have to learn that a little bit. I don't think I necessarily went into it not knowing that, but I definitely learned along the way that you have to kind of release a little control over everything going on. Your villain's going to get murdered. You know, they might destroy your favorite NPC. They might crash the train that was supposed to take them to the next area that you've prepared and stuff like that. You have to kind of just be prepared for them to go left when you've only planned right. And if you don't kind of have that mindset,
call out.
it's good to train. It's good you did that. Yeah,
yeah, that
but
was
you have
me.
to be. You did but it's happened in every game, and it happens. You know, it kind of happens every session, and that's good and it's fine. But like, plan your epic adventure and have everything you want to be planned out. But I think it's best to plan it on like a macro level and not plan things like scenes. How you want this conversation to go with the big bad evil guy, because that's just not going to work. But have a conversation with the big bad evil guy here and be prepared for it to go any way. You can plan the whole thing. You can plan an epic, but just being okay with it when it doesn't go specifically to plan or goes off or completely gets trashed and nuked is extremely important. And I think it's a really hard mindset to get. I'm a bit of a control freak in real life. I'm a little OCD. And I had to kind of learn that a little bit, and it actually kind of helped me. When I say I'm a little OCD, I'm a diagnosed OCD. Like, I'm not just like, oh my God, I'm so OCD too. I have to walk in a room twice. Like, yeah, I genuinely have it. And it's a really good learning curve when you have a little bit of a control freak nature to every week run something like this and just constantly have them take that control from you in an exposure therapy way. And eventually you learn it. And then you also start to learn that it kind of blooms a really unique story. Like, you don't need to be in control. You're not a mastermind. You kind of sometimes have to role play one, and you kind of have to spin a lot more plates than a player. But sometimes you're like, well, that is so much better than anything I planned. And that's just because they went left. And I've only planned right here, and I can't believe that they've done this. And it's so much more interesting. And sometimes they're like, that story's really unique, Brad. How did you come up with that? I'm like,
That's a good question.
They went left.
My favorite moment is when like players will be like, I bet they're doing this because of this. And I'm like, that's a much better reason
That's
than like I had
exactly
planned
what
out.
is happening now.
Yeah. It's definitely what I had planned, not just you pointing it out, and I'm loving it.
Yeah. It's the old DM
Great.
smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. Well,
You can
look, I think-
also.
no, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say you can also make your events modular, right? So if you had something planned for your players to discover when they went left, but instead they went right, you can just move it and put it where they go when they go right.
Yeah. Readjusting and reusing and recycling stuff is good.
That's
That's kind of like, I'd love to emphasize this because like you don't need to be an incredible creator to homebrew. Like me, I've always felt like I was a creative person, but I can't draw. I'm not a great writer. But I'm good at telling stories. And if you've ever sat around with your friends playing like video games or watching cartoons, and it's like, man, what if Megatron went to the Mega Man world and got infected with the Wily virus? You're homebrewing. All right. You're homebrewing right there.
It's begun.
That you that's the impetus of what it is. And like I consume pop culture like most people consume water, so I steal from everything.
Oh yeah.
And
Never had an original thought in here.
Yeah, right. And don't be afraid to do that. Watch all of these shows. Watch other DMs DM, because they've got some great stuff to teach you. Watch all these incredible people on this panel, and that's not just a plug. I'm going to steal stuff from everybody here.
Also, to bring it back to horror just for a second, definitely watch TV shows, those slow burn TV shows for their pacing. That's where you can learn pacing, and even just like in an action show or something like that, you can learn a lot from watching TV shows.
Absolutely. Yeah, just like, I mean, sometimes popular things are popular for a reason, and don't be afraid to take that stuff and adapt it to what you do. My homebrew world that I do for the show is populated with NPCs that are either player characters that I played with in my past, NPCs that I've been using for X number of years, or players that I've played, player characters that I've played. And then there's just the random stuff that I put in that I'm like, oh, what if these two villains were the same person? Or like, you don't need to be a prize-winning writer. You don't need to be the greatest storyteller in the world, and you don't even need to start from scratch. Like, one thing that I've learned doing this for so long is that the Forgotten Realms, like the D&D world, it's huge and it's complex and it's got crazy stuff in it. And like, I'll do something in the game and I'll think, oh, well, this is nuts. There's no way. Like, this is off the wall. Nobody's going to accept this. And then I read about, oh yeah, there's a race of shadow dragon drow assassins that live in the world, and I'm like, what? That's nuts.
Yeah, that's insane. And I think a lot of people expect, if you're the first time you're GMing or something, or you want to run a homebrew thing, people I think expect that they have to build everything. Like world building is hard. Build an entire pantheon. Come up somehow with like the entire Forgotten Realms, but their version is insane. You'll never do it. It's just it's so overwhelming to think about it that way. You get a lot of questions, I think, when you're a GM, and a lot of it is just like, how do I start? Where do I begin? And really just begin with like the first thing. Just do one episode or whatever, like just put your characters in a place. And then when they ask, what's the next town over? And if you don't have it, just make up a word. What did I say before the stream? Babooby? Babooby. It's Babooby Town. It's a kobold town. And I was doing it right now. It's a kobold. You're just panicking, but it's improv, and that's it. And they go, oh, I want to go there now. And you're like, well, okay. And then next week, whenever you next play, you can sit and create Babooby, and then you can go, it's a kobold town because of this, and you start to justify things. And slowly but surely, again, no different to the players kind of building their characters week to week, fleshing them out as they interact with more things, and find out how your character deals with this situation, and then this one. You build your character of the world, and you can just build up. Because it is overwhelming, I think, when you want to homebrew something, but you look at everyone else's worlds, and they're like 25 years deep, or they're running a module that exists, and you go, well, I can't do that. Well, you can. It's just that just start from a booby town first, and then build everything else.
Or even because they tell you, I think, in creative writing to sit down and come up with your premise, like your kind of back of the book blurb first, like what your general idea is going to be. And then I usually will think at the end of episode 1, what is the hook for the player to go, whoa, what happens next week? And then for the audience as well. And then kind of a general idea of maybe where I would like, see it ending, but that will always change. But I like to have it ahead of time, like throw it out the window probably by episode 3, but just kind of knowing the reason I like to know sort of maybe where it might end is so that I can put things in the beginning that kind of hint towards that. It's part of the hook, right? And then, don't worry about the middle stuff, because your players are going to do all of that. You're just going to write everything around what they're doing and around their characters. And, you're going to be able to do a whole sessions where it's, backstory oriented around this, one player or, 2 players or something like that. Don't worry about the middle bit. It's like the best part of doing, collaborative storytelling is that you don't have to write the novel. You don't have to do all the hard parts. You just get to do the fun bits.
I think I described
all the voices.
When somebody asked me like what it's like, I said, okay, it's kind of like writing a novel, except you don't have to write any character dialogue and you make up the events in the middle on your own. Like everything just comes to it. And going back to what Emily was saying about yes-anding, like the yes-anding stuff, like can give you some incredible moments. The one thing we had in our game was we brought in like a one-shot character, and somebody said, well, where are you from? And he said, I'm from the town of Nya. And I'm like, okay, that's the town name.
Yep.
And then we went to Nya, and like it became a real thing in the world. Like, and it was funny, and it was fun. And that's in the end what it's all about. Don't be afraid to just roll with it.
Yeah. I think it's really it's like the car driving thing of you learn a bit, and then you don't learn to drive until you're driving around. I feel like that's really the case with this because it looks so overwhelming from the outside. Like all GMs are born from just someone going, we need a GM now. And whoever just goes, all right, fine, I'll read the book. Is it like no one wants to do the whole, because you just always think you have an enormous, overwhelming task ahead of you to create this thing. And you're like, I need to make Game of Thrones from scratch. It's insane to try and, if you were to try and write those books, there's so many characters and things. You don't need to. They will appear when they need to. Wizard meme.
They will reveal themselves with
precisely
time.
When they mean to.
as if they will come through the mist.
It's Babooby Town.
Yeah, you don't have to build your continent from scratch. You can start with the Forgotten Realms. There is a Forgotten Realms wiki with tons of information that I literally just pull stuff from all the time and be like, okay, sure, this is happening now. Or like take an event and age it and say, oh, well, what happens, 20 years down the road after this occurs. If it isn't in a book already, if the event specifically hasn't happened the way that you're putting it out, you're homebrewing. Like that's
100%. It's like when we spoke before and I told you that I never make my own pantheon of gods. I just use the Forgotten Realms gods, names and domain, and then don't use any of their lore. I just go, Merkel is the god of death, but in this setting, he's whatever he is, a giant spider, with 1,000 faces or something. Yeah, and that's just how it is. And you can make up your own stuff, invent and justify.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, we talked about this a little bit on our call before, but I think it's funny because I had this, my first campaign experience that I played in was a homebrewed module, but I didn't realize that it had been homebrewed. It was so great. The GM was fantastic. I had one of the best experiences ever. I felt empowered as a player. I had moments where I was scared and I had moments where I felt like a huge badass. It was great. And then, several years later, friends are like, oh, let's all play, D&D. And, we need a GM, just like Brad said. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do it. You know what? I'll go get that Sunless Citadel module because that game was the best thing ever. And I'm reading through the module like, what the is this? This isn't the game that I played. Like this isn't. The GM's homebrew was so much better and like very immersive because he would just make stuff up and just give life to it, and it was.
What did you do though? Did you run it or did you?
No,
make up your
I
own
homebrewed
version?
the heck out of it. I tried
Yeah.
so
So
hard
you
to
did
like
this-
recreate that and
you
then
tried to do
just
the
kind of
other
like
one.
do my own. So it's then became a homebrew of a homebrew, right?
Yeah,
It was
it's
good. Yeah.
Which is what all of these things are. Like mine is just a homebrew of a Final Fantasy game that has been filtered through way too many movies from the 90s.
Yeah. And
that's it.
That's I think the moment that I realized that GMs do just kind of like make it up as they go along, because I was still in contact with my GM. So I would call him and be like, they did this. So would you remember like what happened here? No, I made that up. Like, I don't know. That just happened. I didn't write this out. Like, blah.
It literally fell out of my mind the next day.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, the whole premise for my homebrew world that I run for the show was I was mad that there was no unifying adventuring organization in the Forgotten Realms. So I made one. Like it was, and now I just kind of build everything around it. I'm like, oh, that was cool. This happened in that module, but what if it happened at this time? Or what if this, like, it's the module books, don't be afraid to read them, even if you want to homebrew stuff, because there's good stuff in there that you can take events and scenarios and things out of. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I steal like a madman. Puzzles. I'm like, yes.
Yeah,
From
right.
this chapter. Oh, from over here. Oh, this weird encounter. Great. We're gonna throw it in here. Just making a weird, crazy salad out of all these different modules and like, posts online. Like, great, I want to do this, but I don't like that. Okay, well, I'm gonna take a little bit of that, take a little bit of that, put it in my bowl. I'm gonna mix it all up, and here is your tabletop RPG salad experience.
That's not stealing, that's inspiration.
Yeah, it's inspiration. Like
by the end, it doesn't look like the thing it was.
It's
though.
nothing like the
most
thing
people
that
would
you-
never. I often say, "Oh, I just got that from this," and they're like, "Really?" Because it doesn't seem like it. But in my head, I'm like, "I totally stole that thing."
Yeah.
But you've changed it. You've changed, change up my homework, change a word here and there, put it into a different setting, and then usually under a different context, and then applied it to these players who are going to deal with it a completely different way than you could ever imagine usually. And then you have an original thing by the end of it, even though I think it really is inspiration, even if at the beginning it was outright theft and plagiarism.
Yeah, like we were saying before we got started here, like Tomb of Horrors, even if you're never going to run Tomb of Horrors and you read through it, there's some incredible traps in there that you could just throw in anywhere. Like, oh, you touch this stone and you appear naked in a dungeon and all of your stuff is gone. I never would have come up with something like that, but I'm going to use it everywhere.
Switching things up, or finding something that was like a water-based puzzle, but you're in a fire tomb. Just change it to fire, and you can do that with everything as well. That's like monsters, encounters and everything. You're like, oh, this is a cool monster, but it's a dog. Well, I need it to be a cat, so now it's a cat. Like same stat block.
What is? I'm going to derail us a little bit here, but this is kind of fun, so I want to do it.
This is where the chaos begins.
Yeah. What is the dumbest monster everyone has come up with? And I could say mine. Mine is a golem constructed out of all of the items in a kitchen. So he had a hearth in his chest. One fist was a cauldron, and the other fist was a collection of kitchen knives. And his name was Kit Chen.
Oh yeah, it was detective, attorney at law.
Kit Chen, attorney at law. Who wants to go next?
You raised
I
a
wanna
hand,
hear-
PB.
Well, only because it was before he said monster. So, but I'll still go. But I'd like to hear Emily first, because it sounded like she had one.
I can't even think. I can't think of a monster right now, but I can think of like an NPC. Like it was Greg the centaur, who's like a hipster centaur, but looks like Jason Momoa and runs his own like brewery, like microbrewery, and he wants to like. And oh my gosh, it was so great. And like, it was so funny.
Okay.
He was wonderful. And all of my players started falling in love with him and wanting to flirt with him. And I'm like having to flirt with like this cool cigarette smoking hipster Jason Momoa centaur. And it was like, I love this. This is great.
Yeah,
I love being a
and,
GM.
And do you have his number for me by any chance?
It's 3 hoof taps on his door.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic. Players falling in love with your NPCs and wanting to take them everywhere with them.
Oh, yeah,
No, you can't have an entire second party. I'm sorry.
Can we keep them?
Yeah, exactly. Did you have one, Brad?
Do you have one?
I don't know if I have one. I feel like all of my characters are dumb, really, and then I present them, and everyone just says whatever they say. I don't know if I have any like really crazy ones. I usually just create whatever I need.
It's not dumb. It was like really good and creepy. Do you want to talk about your eye monster?
The eye monster
is
it was horrifying.
Yeah, it was more scary, but like again, like I guess that applies to what I said as well, in that I needed something that represented the area. There was basically a temple, let's just say a temple to divination, and they were trying to see the future, and they were also trying to make like a security creature. So they made a thing out of eyes that could see really well, and what it does is it takes your eyes and makes itself stronger, and it's made like of nothing but like, we described it as that stuff gack. You remember that from like
yeah.
It's like that, but with people's eyes and creatures and things that it's seen and is defending the area with. And it can move through walls and cracks in walls and stuff. So
it's like completely amorphous and just like made entirely out of eyes.
Eyes and gack.
Yeah, and it would like they would fall down from the ceiling at first. At least that's how we found out about it. Is that just an eye fell down from the ceiling, and we were like, "What?" And then looked up, and it's like all these.
And it crawls out of stuff and gets you, and then it tries to suck your eyes out of your head. So that was pretty horrific. Yeah, it was called the Oculus.
Great, though.
Just like separate into a swarm of eyes and move across the room, and you're just engulfed in these eyes. Oh, I love it. I love this creature.
It's really, really
so
good.
I usually do stuff like that. I like to try and make things. Again, it's the same thing as just like trying to make it appropriate to wherever they are, kinda, so that it makes sense. I love justified stuff. You know, sometimes it's hard when you're improvising in the moment and you go, yeah, it's called Babooby, and it just doesn't make, you're like a kobold town in the middle of Hertfordshire in England. What are you saying right now? You're in the wrong campaign, Brad. And I've had 3 hours sleep, and I realized that I'm not even supposed to be in this person's house, and then I leave. But if you can justify it, then it's so much better, and it enriches the world. It's so much more immersive. So I usually try and do that. I've definitely had dumb NPCs, but I can't think of it. I'm terrible at the think of the thing now.
Oh yeah,
memory thing. My memory is destroyed.
Recall something.
But what about you, Pumpkinberry?
Well, I was part of a campaign that was supposed to be like Lord of the Rings, but entirely made of cheese. So and it was like pizza themed. Yeah, well, it was a sponsored campaign from Totino's actually with Twitch. So they were like, we'd love for you to just do D&D, and then it was my friend Brotato actually GM'd it, and they said, you do whatever you want. Like, we don't mind if it's funny and absurd. And he said, because I'm thinking Lord of the Rings, but everything's cheese, and it's, you know, a mountain of, you know, ravioli and stuff coming down, and then we're gonna have pizza monsters and all sorts of stuff. And they went, yeah, it sounds great. So the creature that we created on the spot was a pepperoni steed that we rode, and it rolled like a, you know, and he on the fly made this really gross, to be honest, like flopping sound as the pepperoni was rolling down. It was great. I can't remember what we called it now, but it was pretty good. It's full of cheesy puns as well.
Nice.
That's incredible.
Oh, it was Steederoni. What's wrong with me?
Steederoni.
Steederoni. That's what happens when you improv in the moment.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hey, all the best stuff. I'm going to say all of it. A lot of the great stuff comes from improv. And I'll just say this real quick, since we're on the topic.
No,
another big part of improv right now, improv for me is the idea that mistakes are gifts. Mistakes are the best gifts you can have at the table and in a show and whatever you're doing. And like, you take that and you're like, yeah, okay, this is the new thing. Great. Awesome. You know what? I meant to say this, accidentally said this. We're rolling with this now. Oh, you failed this and it was supposed to be really easy, or, oh, you succeeded this and it was supposed to be really hard. Great. You know what? All good. We're going to roll with it and like, just take whatever you've got and it's all good.
Yeah, it brings
Yeah.
it back to that yes anding. Now, I had the craziest thing happen, and I think it was episode 1 of the horror show that I was running, where one of the players called my NPC her, and in my brain I was like, well, it was a bald black man professor, and you just said her and made it sound like you had a relationship with this person. I literally was like, okay, throwing that NPC out the window, and I'll write a new one later, but yeah, we'll go with this. And it ended up actually being a fundamental part of that story, because I did the yes and it ended up kind of morphing his character, and there was a huge love story part later. It was great, but it wouldn't have happened had I stopped and said, no, sorry, it's this instead of that. So huge fan of Emily's yes and. I think it's like the most important thing you can do as a GM.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to open it up to questions now. That's all right with everybody?
Sure.
All right.
For sure.
So everyone, if you put your questions up in chat, I will pick the choices. Only the ripest.
Oh, can I just start with a question while you're
sure.
waiting for somebody in chat
Absolutely.
to have one? I have one for Emily, because I didn't realize that you were the person that did the Rat Queens. So I freaked out when you said that. You said that you were in theater, and the first time that you had done tabletop, were you GMing the first time?
No, I played in it. So actually, like special shout out to my first GM was James Hayek. He's now a writer for Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah,
so like
whoa.
I had a really good, I am here because of him. This is 100% why. And he was great. And I got a point of inspiration in that game because there was this bully in our theater department, and I put him in our campaign as my character's backstory, or this weird fable about this guy who was this huge bully. And I got a point of inspiration. I never knew what that was. I realized that that's because as a player, I'm being creative and I'm adding to your story and I'm contributing as well. How cool. So, no, I did not. I would have love to have just jumped and been like, I'm GMing. I don't know what this is, but we're going to do it.
Yeah.
But I definitely was a player first.
All right. So I've got some questions coming in. Here's a good one. When forming a homebrew world, what is the biggest mistake you have ever made, and how did you recover?
Ooh.
Easy.
As a demo, if anybody wants to pick it up.
I feel like we've already answered it a little bit. I think it's trying to just create a tome of your lore and story and how it needs to go, and you have a beginning, middle, and end, and you just try and facilitate that through your players rather than building the majority of the book and the story together.
What's that saying that we do, Brad? It's like, if you can't go write a book, if you don't want to collaborate with the group, if you just want them going along.
Why would you do this? You know that my brain is filling all of the things in with dick jokes. I can't. You can't. But Brad, what's the
all
phrase?
Dick jokes and references.
You can't
up
do
here.
this.
It's all gone.
Blank.
Okay, sorry.
I can't.
There's a saying that we will constantly repeat. That's write a book if you don't want to sit down at the table and tell a story with everybody included. Go write a book.
Right. Yeah, it's somewhere along there. That sounds like we have a good phrase.
We do. I just can't remember it.
Really, we wrote a book that was a phrase.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me when I first started out was I'm gonna have all these things, you got to go do this, and you got to go do this, and you're going to go do this, thinking it was almost this checklist for my characters, and then you're going to go here, and then you're going to go here, plotting it out, but two plotting it out. And then I realized as I played games more and more, sometimes less is more, because your characters and your players are going to give you so much at the table. They're going to want to do things that they want to do too. So you can have, I think Pumpkinberry touched on this too. You can have
this is so good.
You can have a broad outline of what you want to do. I think you should always have a place where it's this is where we want to end up, 100%. If we can reach here, great. But have ideas. Okay, if they want to go do this, here's an idea. If they want to go do this, here's an idea. If they want to go do this, here's an idea. Because I know for me, sometimes after a session, I would feel kind of too. Because then I'd be like, why do I feel bad as a GM? Oh, because I don't think we were all connecting, and I don't think everybody was on board with just we got to go do this, and we got to do this, got to do this, and we got to do this, and just realizing that the fun is in the creativity for everyone. And that is also where story comes out. As a GM, you don't have to overplan everything, and what a relief and what a gift that is. You get to just have it happen at the table.
Yeah, it's nice. And I think that's different from railroading as well, by the way. I feel like a lot of people kind of put it in two camps, like railroading or a game on tracks and sandbox games and stuff. I think that the railroading is completely fine in moderation. I think it's important because otherwise sometimes it's just silly and like not without any sort of purpose or focus or something. It kind of just can kind of feel like everyone's wasting their time. Like it's still good to facilitate a story and put people on tracks from time to time. And
sometimes you got to move them along.
There's also players that are expecting that from the GM too. They're like doing stuff and then they're like, where's our clue? Where's our hint? Where are we supposed to go? You know, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, and I think it's appropriate, but I don't if all you're doing is like, and now you go over here and your character says hello.
And I don't care if you rolled a natural 17, you're not killing this character and he's cutting off your arm. Like what?
Before we go any further with the questions, I just want to remind everybody, make sure that you head over to the link in the right side, redeem your ticket, and get your ticket, redeem your ticket, because we will be doing the draw at the end of the questions. So you want to be in for that. And I apologize for the sirens. Okay.
It's the armed guard to go and collect the tickets.
The fire department's coming by. All right. Here's another one. What is the absolute max size for a group in one session playing TTRPG?
Oh, that's a joke that's aimed at PB, I think. You want to explain that joke?
Yeah, I think that's for me because I have said, oh no, 5 is the max that I can handle, and now I'm running a show with nine people in it. So yeah, that's a yes. There is no max. Whatever you're comfortable with, and then push it just a little bit further, I guess.
Yeah, be sure you're up for the challenge too, because the larger group you have, the more challenging it's going to be.
Yes, and I did hear some really good advice from my dear friend Classy Pax, who is a role player and streamer on Twitch, who said, try to do odd numbers, because if even numbers, people will tend to, pair up, but adding in odd numbers means you've always got room for an extra element or tension. And I have since been like, you're absolutely right. Took that advice to heart. Very, very accurate.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Here's another good one. When you create histories and lore about your homebrew places, especially when players went to make history checks and such, so how do you create that?
I'll speak on an interesting place. So with the Rat Queens RPG, I was homebrewing adventures in somebody's pre-existing world. So Curtis Weeb, the creator of the Rat Queens comic, basically told me, have fun. I said, is there any stipulation? Is there any guidelines? Like, what do you want me to do? He's like, no, it's your play in this world. I want you to play in my world. So it was the balance.
Best.
It was very sweet and I don't want to disappoint. But he was great and even came guested on an episode with us. But for me, it was the balance of, okay, what are the things that he's created and how do I expand upon this world? So he had a few of these gods that he had created. And I was like, but what if there were these old gods? And that is kind of the bad of this situation, is this old god has just manifested. And they go to some places in the Rat Queens comics, but they mainly stay in Palisade. So I was like, well, what if I created Vegas in this realm? And what does Vegas in the Rat Queens RPG look like? Or what does fantasy Vegas look like? And how do I create that? And how do these towns know this town? So it was this balance of okay, cool. I'm going to pull kind of what we've all been touching on. I'm going to pull from these other sources that I love. What's some fantasy books that I loved growing up that have really cool mythologies? Oh, I kind of like this idea. What if I twisted it into this way and put it here? Or oh, I love these kind of matronly mother characters that are these women that just run things. And so I'm great, this is going to be the head of this, there's 3 rivals at this Vegas town. They all run their own resorts and casinos. And the head is this matron woman. And it's
Big
yeah.
mama.
And so, just I think it's pull from sources that you love, pull from video games, movies, books, comics. What media do you like to consume? What inspires you from there? And then, yeah, I think with history checks too, surprise yourself, improvise on the spot, give a little bit. And then if you're like, yeah, write it down later. Like you can always create something so beautiful and unique in the moment. Like don't ever feel bad if someone asks you something, you're like, because I think we've all been there, but just kind of like, hey, in the moment, this is what I'm thinking of, like, oh, in this town, actually, there was a huge flood in the past. And so the town is still rebuilding itself from this terrible disaster. And you can see the water lines on some of the buildings, on the old surviving buildings from where this flood devastated this town. Being from Houston, like immediately Hurricane Harvey comes to mind. And that's what happened to some friends' homes. So it's like, take what you know, build off of that, because you yourself are such a plethora of knowledge and experiences that only you can tell.
It's like
Sorry,
a
I just
skin.
dominated that.
No,
Yeah,
that
but
was
it's- yeah,
amazing. That
that's
end
really,
line
really
is
good
excellent
idea.
super important.
Skin Vegas with whatever your setting
Yeah.
is, and
And
then yeah,
retroactively justify it for your
Yeah,
game.
absolutely.
Like, oh, I want to
Yeah.
do that now, but why? And like, how does that fit into what I'm already doing? And what would be the reason for this to be here? You know, that kind of stuff. Start with your
It's a
really
really,
cool
really good
idea,
idea.
and then go work backwards from the thing that you want to do.
it's half the reason I homebrew anyway. Like I
Mhm.
have a terrible memory, so but for some reason, if I've kind of created it, even if I wrote it 2 years ago, it's in my head rather than something that I'm running from a module or someone else's work where I have to kind of study it and remember it, and I'm struggling. So sometimes running a homebrew is just good for that anyway, because you can pull up some old thing and go, oh yeah, I know the lore as well. Like if you already have it,
Yeah.
you created it, you know it intimately. So that's
I know
another.
that was a thing I did.
Yeah, I made that up. And yeah, that's a nice thing. All right, I'm speaking
All right.
now, and I'm gonna stop.
Oh, Brad, we love you. It's great.
Sorry.
All right. So, how do you make satisfying story arcs for your players from Three-Eyed Magpie? I'm gonna add the names now. So,
Pay attention. Pay attention
Yeah.
to what the players are doing and kind of the direction that they're taking their character. Watch what they do when they interact with your NPCs, how they're interacting with other players, and just go, you know, okay, well, what arc are they trying to take their character on? And then how do I push them or facilitate? Because that's kind of really what you're doing as a GM, right? You want to put them in situations that can make their character grow in the, you know, in the kind of the direction, or challenge them a bit so that they know their character through and through by the time that the show or the campaign's over.
yeah, I agree completely. Like I come from a sales background, so like reading people is kind of my bag. Like that's so like your players will tell you what's important to them if you're paying attention to what they're doing. And I mean, even if you don't have those skills, even if you played like 3 or 4 sessions with somebody, you can't figure out what they're at. I mean, just like Emily was saying earlier, ask them. Like they're your players. Ask them. Sometimes you just got to talk to your players and figure out what they want.
And sometimes
and
you can
then-
read that they're just up for anything. So
Yeah.
you can be free more on your side of things if you do want to just keep providing your book that you're writing, and they're just enjoying it enough, and they're just kind of going with your thing. You can go with that flow too as well. Don't be afraid to do your own thing. I think we've done a lot of like, don't write a book and make sure you know what your players want, but you do want to make sure that your thing exists, and if they're enjoying that, then you can lean into that as well. Yeah, watching people, I think, is what we all do. We all sound really creepy now because we're all just sitting there watching our players over
Yeah.
the DM screen.
What are you doing?
Picking
Yeah.
you apart. I'm figuring out how you tick.
I know exactly what's going to freak you out around this next corner.
Another story thing, another aspect of long form improv is the idea of kill the vampire. So sometimes what excites a story and what gets a story moving is when you kill the vampire, because that is when the fun starts, because you don't know what's coming next. You know, this vampire exists. Oh man. And that's just like, that's not saying put vampires in your game and just kill them. That's just like a broad story phrase.
Like
Of,
let
like-
them
Not all
complete the
vampires.
objective
Yeah.
and then
If-
keep
and-
going.
And
Yeah.
even if your character's goal is like, I want to reunite with my wife, if that lends itself to be early on in the story, as a player and a GM, say yes and to that and say great, because then where your character goes next is the exciting part, because you don't even know. You're going to figure that out on your own, and the GM's going to figure that out with you, and then you're going to have a whole new adventure for your character in the story in the setting.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of coincidences, right? Like if a bunch of stuff lines up to where the players are going anyways, it's still character growth. It's still something that's happening, right? You just unfold it.
Yeah, and you don't have to save everything for the end. Like if you know your character wants to reunite with their wife, you don't have to be like, well, I can't let that happen until the very end, because character growth happens in waves, right? You want to make the game the ocean, so the players are constantly.
They're going to come up with something else that they want after that. You know, maybe they need a home after they've met with their wife. Like there's always a step 2. Cool. All right. We got a couple other good ones in here. We got.
There was one that I saw that I thought was interesting because we haven't talked about it at all.
Sure.
The mechanics, like how does homebrewing the mechanics? So the question was, have you ever needed to edit or eliminate world building elements for the sake of gameplay? And how does homebrew gameplay mechanics differ from homebrew settings or stories? Because we haven't really talked about homebrewing mechanics before. I think that's.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, just like.
I'm so dumb. I'm sorry.
No, how does homebrewing gameplay mechanics differ from homebrewing settings and stories? Because there's a lot more freedom with homebrewing your setting, whereas if you're homebrewing the mechanics, you have the potential to break the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to be cautious.
If
right?
anybody, I don't want to step on anybody, but
yeah,
like I homebrew mechanics. Like I have a bad habit of creating weapons and then doing the mechanics almost as an afterthought, and then they use it, and then it's like, oh geez.
Yeah, I've created the world-ending blade.
You've done this before too.
Yeah, I've accidentally made a multiverse-destroying blade that has, sunk multiple campaigns at once. Oops.
I think it's a different process. I think you have to think about the math more. You have to think about how it could be utilized, and you have to think about, okay, put yourself in the player's shoes. I've been given this. What is every possible thing I could do with it, with the mechanics that it has?
Yeah. And are you okay with it being like that?
And are you okay with all those things?
If it is a multiverse destroying sword, that's fine if you want to hand it over, but you have to be aware that they will destroy the multiverse with it, and it's going to happen. So... yeah, I think one thing that I run into quite a lot, and I feel like I walk a line with it. It's not always the case for every tabletop game, but with D&D, I can say that it has been the case where you're kind of having to strike a decent balance between the mechanics and just homebrewing in whatever you want, because it can kind of unbalance in a non-fun way. Like we're all for giving characters the ability to do whatever they want to do that makes it fun for them. But sometimes you can kind of unbalance elements that will not be fun. For example, I've been in campaigns before where the DM will just say, oh, this thing comes down and destroys you and kills you. And you're like, wow, I had no control over that. And you can end up unbalancing your game in a way that you end up becoming the very thing you swore to destroy, Anakin. And I have several times unbalanced everything by doing that, and I think for me with D&D specifically, or anything that's a little more mechanical, I try to keep the mechanics isolated to combat. I try and stick as close to what the rules are around combat, because you don't want to end up, your players are playing one game. They might be Googling things. They might be checking the PHP. They might be looking at what their spell says. And a lot of D&D is like you specifically are able to do what the words say you can do. And if you're kind of breaking everything and homebrewing things in too much, you're playing two different games. And it's a little unfair when you're the GM with all the cards and they kind of expect that they can do one thing or they can't. And then you've ruled one thing or ruled too many things. And it ends up in something that might be a player death, or player character death, not a player death, which that would be a very
that's another situation
of multiverse weapon destroying situations. But the player character death, and then because that can be quite troublesome sometimes, and you don't want any resentment, and you don't want it to feel like it was as a result of your meddling with what they thought the rules were, and that's not fair. It's just not fair. And so trying to make sure for me that the mechanics are as close to what they should be for the gameplay elements that might have consequences like that, deaths and stuff. And for me, that's usually combat sequences and things. And then outside of that, I'm like, yeah, dude, blow up the multiverse, with your...
You do a good job, though, Brad, of kind of like of melding those two, because you will break the characters. You will give us ultimate weapons. You will give us really cool stuff. But then we all know when we're in a fight, the mechanics we're following the PHB.
Right,
so we do have that safety net. Yeah,
and
we're following the rules.
I will, in the moment during the combat on the stream while we're playing, a lot of the time I just roll something and move on.
Yeah.
And if it's something that I think might come up multiple times, I'll go away and look it up. But I think that's one thing as well. Like you can do certain things in a turn, and then I'm like, yeah, whatever for now. Move on. And that just kind of keeps play going. But I do think it's worth being aware of it. You don't want to break it too hard to the point where anything might become unbalanced that then takes the more board game elements into a direction that's a little unfair, or just leaves people confused. You don't want your players feeling like you've done something unfair or confused them. It still comes back to trying to facilitate the best game for everyone. Long-winded answer, but it's a tricky question, I think.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely like a minefield, especially when you're making mechanics.
Weird tightrope, isn't it? To make sure that you're walking it correctly, because you want it to be fun, but also you don't want to be like, it's so fun, and you've just fell off. And now you're
in one of my first long campaigns sorry, it was PBA, I'll let you go. But first long form campaign I did, I gave my Dragonborn Paladin player a sword that allowed him to summon a spectral ancestor to assist him. And the way I worded it was that it did everything that he did. And he used that to wreck so many encounters because he basically had another him. He had another set of hands
double
to
damage.
Accomplish anything that he needed to do. Not even double damage. Like there was a scenario where there was 2 cages suspended, like Batman Forever style, and like one was going to drop and the other one was, they were both going to drop at the same time. He caught one, summoned his ancestor to catch the other one, save both the people.
And you're throwing your entire campaign over your
shoulder.
He's
throwing the whole thing out of disarray with this thing, and I'm like, man, whoops.
It will happen. My first ever campaign, I super over powered the party and unbalanced the campaign, and now I do it a lot, and it's almost become a meme. But I actually made it a point in this campaign that I'm running now that's coming towards the end. I'm purposefully overpowering them to absurd levels, because partially it's kind of meta and fun for me to do memes around it, and partially it's a theme that exists in the campaign. So it was perfect for me. But the first one, I didn't know how to GM. I didn't really know the rules well enough to break them. So I kind of just ruined my own campaign for myself and my players, because I wasn't able to really facilitate any good encounters specifically. I remember I would just put stuff in front of them where I'd go, I have no idea if they're just going to explode this thing with one hit or if it's going to kill them immediately. I had no idea, and it was kind of scary. And a lot of the time it was never balanced. It was either one or the other. That are either just getting beaten immediately, and that's not always that fun, or they're just killing it, and that's not fun. And now I'm in a position where I'm like, well, I have no idea what to do. I can nerf them. That sucks for them. You just lose all your stuff. Boo-hoo. Horrific thing to do all of a sudden. Or I can, I had to learn. Basically, I learned. I think I'm now an expert of breaking campaigns.
Yes, you are.
And
but they're still playable. Yeah.
Playable and balanced in a way.
Yeah.
And that's why I ran Dying Order on Sundays on Tablestory. Sorry, carry
on. I'm a little bit different because I am mostly running things that aren't like 5e or D&D. I homebrew mechanics all the time. So to answer this question, or I will leave stuff out. I'll omit things which the question specifically said. If I don't feel like it's going to fit the narrative, or I feel like it's just going to confuse people or take away from what's happening, we're just going to forget that part of the rules. Don't even worry about it. Like we'll agree to something at the table together, and then that's will be how we proceed. So yeah, I think especially for bringing it back to horror, but percentile systems are the best for a horror game, because everybody looks at that 1 or that 2, and if they've got a scale, if role players have a scale and they go 100 is like critical success, 0 is absolute total failure, they know how to role play, and all they have to do is roll. You don't have to say anything, and they know how to say what it is that they're going to do. And you can just say role play, go ahead, what happens to you? And they can do it just looking at the roll. It's great. It's so
That's
good.
beautiful.
Mhm.
She didn't even let us look at the book. We are playing the Nibiru system
Mhm.
right now in PB's game. I'm in that, and I still haven't looked at the book. So
So
there was
good,
just
though.
no meta. No, I didn't know what I was doing. She would just say, roll this dice. And I didn't know what it meant or what it did.
Yeah.
All I saw was the outcome. And it is some of the most fun role play I've ever done, ever, because I literally cannot meta. I have I can only be my character going, what? It did what? Why? And she's like, how do you react? The why is in the book, but you can't read it because it's, your perspective of real life is how this goes. And it's a really cool way to present something, but there's no way that you could really do that and have it be an extremely mechanical game.
Yeah, not on
You have
something
to
like
be omitting
5e.
things and
Yeah.
changing things. Yeah.
So in that game specifically, that was just an experiment where I was like, let's see how they react, or if they have more fun without having to keep track of stuff on their sheet, and like what the game is like for the player, if they really feel like their character when they're like, I want to use this power. Because sometimes you'll look at your sheet and go, oh, I don't have enough spell points or whatever to do this spell. It doesn't even give you the opportunity for your character to try to do the spell and fail.
Yeah.
And I just really liked that idea. So I was like, I'll just keep track of all your spell points and stuff on your sheets. You guys don't look at the rules. Just go do your thing. You have 2 separate sheets, one with the mechanic stuff on it and one with, your stuff. And they will try. They will try things. And then it's like, they don't know why it's not, succeeding yet. And then they're starting to work it out, which has been kind of like a game in itself. Them learning the rules of the game. It's just, it's been fun. So it's very nice to hear you say you're also having a good time. Because I was like,
I didn't say I was having a good time. I just said it was a good idea.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Because
kidding.
I thought
It's
I
great.
heard you
It's
say
like
it was the greatest
best.
role play experience ever.
No, it is. It is. It is
The
literally
bestest.
amazing and super unique, and she knows it is. And me and PB are very close. We're very good friends.
Yeah, we're just like hitting on
The
each other
best.
on this panel.
right.
Like these strangers just being really mean.
Stu.
They're awful.
Couple quick ones. What tools do you use for world building and GMing?
Shovels for when that player dies. So call back to the player character joke that I made, that when a player died, not the character. It's okay. I'll just mute myself.
Anybody have any tools that they use usually when they're world building or anything like that?
World building. I definitely love keep a master doc of like, all right, here are like here's the pantheon I have right now. Here are the towns that I've established. Here are the NPCs that I've mentioned. And then every week, just like especially just updating that. Actually, I learned this from Malika Lim Eubank, who is the CEO of Hyper and ran the Power Rangers Hyperforce campaign. Note cards. I love having note cards at my table because you just put the NPC name, you put any relationships they have, and then you can constantly update those cards too. That way you have them on hand. So you're not like, because I'm such a note person where I have like, here's my outline, here's my master doc, here's the book, here's another notepad for like random notes during the session. And then these note cards are great because they can just tell me, oh, you're in town. All right, you're going to run into, boom, this character that it lives in this town. This is their job. This is where you see them. And then you can update those cards as you go with like, okay, this character like has now this relationship with them, or they like this, or this character punched them last time. They're probably going to resent that, et cetera, et cetera.
I've seen GMs get the photo albums that have the 5x7 in them, and then they just like tab the town, and they put all the note cards in for the town, so they can flip to through their book easily with their note cards. Yeah,
Nice.
it's good.
Well,
That's a good idea.
Good thing.
I mean, I like that I do a show, and honestly, there's more than a few times where I didn't remember something, and I just go back and watch the episode. I'll be like, oh yeah, that's what happened. Barring that, notes are great. Also, there's a lot of great tools online, especially if you're building. Like I'm a sucker for maps. I love my maps, and there are a lot of pre-made maps out there, but they're never exactly what you want. So there's actually a great program on Steam called Dungeon Painter Studio that's got like assets for like modern, sci-fi, fantasy, all this kind of stuff. All the assets are free in the workshop, and I think the program costs like $12 American. But I use it for all of my games, and I've loaded all my stuff up onto there, and it works great with like Roll20, and you do printouts, or you can have it on a tablet. Really handy. Beyond that, if you're doing something in like 5e Forgotten Realms, there is something called the Forgotten Realms Wiki that has literally all the information about Forgotten Realms. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll send my players to a town at the end of one session. I'll go research the town and then decide what I'm going to do with it on the next session. It's got a ton of great information. I actually used it to create a food and a cooking table based on like ingredients that were in the world. So I'm like, oh, cool. So I can use like these herbs and like death cheese. I can't tell you guys how much how cool death cheese is. You need to look up death cheese.
That's not something that came off of the random table, like you rolled 2d8s and it was death cheese, and then
no, man, death cheese is a real thing, and I love it.
Okay, that's terrifying.
I wish I could take credit for it.
I like to use writers' tools sometimes, like for novels and stuff. And specifically for like NPC creation, I'll just generate like a flaw, a motive, and like a positive attribute for NPCs, and I'll just do that. I'll use generators to kind of flesh out my NPCs.
Fantasy name.
All that.
Yeah, on that fantasy name generator is great. I think there are like NPC like online generators too, where you can like find those too. I love me a good fantasy name generator.
Yeah.
It's that one, Malcolm the Third.
Barring that, look at the things that are around you. Pock trad cod gum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Microphone.
I thought this one was pretty interesting. How do you keep players' interest when you're doing a very long form campaign?
I have no idea.
I think it's, for me, from my personal experience, it's break it up into chapters. Like break it up into just unplugged my computer. Just break it up into little digestible kind of like.
Sorry, are you a wizard? You just unplugged your computer, but you're still here.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just unplugged the charger. Like it's fully charged. Oh yeah, I have a laptop. I'm sorry. I'm a nat 20 technical wizard. Yes.
What happened? I'm so sorry. Please continue.
Ninja'd it back in.
Oh gosh, what were we talking about?
We were talking about
chapters. You were going to do chapters.
Breaking it up into chapters.
Yes.
Oh yeah, breaking it up into chapters and saying, okay, what is the theme of this chapter? What do I want my players to feel / experience in this arc? And then that helps build towards like the main arc. So I knew with the Rat Queens, it was very much, actually I'll talk about The Witcher now. I did The Witcher RPG right after the TV series came out, and I love the games. So those games especially like have deal so much like choice, but you can always you never know what the right choice is. That's the first episode of that Netflix series, and that is echoed throughout different quests and stuff in the game. So that kind of became the theme for my game. So sprinkled throughout this 4-part campaign were like these little moments where it's like, all right, you have a choice, but choices aren't easy. Did you make the right one? Did you make the right one? That helped build and build and build until finally it was like, you either save this town or you're going to doom them, but somebody's dying and you have to be okay with you have to make that choice. So it was just kind of, it's figure out what you're going to build to, and then almost like breadcrumb it and or map out okay, I would love for them to feel this. so that they can then feel this, so that then this kind of builds up to this last big moment.
Yeah.
I
That's
think
good advice.
yeah, the how can I facilitate my players' feelings is like a really good thing that you touched on. And then also breadcrumbs, I do the same thing there. And then you said something that I was like, absolutely, definitely do that. Choices, it's the agency, right? If you give your players choices, those choices have consequences, they will feel invested. As long as they don't feel like you railroaded them through or that you made the choice for them, make sure that they always have agency. But if you're continually presenting them with situations where they have to make a hard choice, it's just you get invested. I don't think there's I think those are all really great ways to do that.
Yeah, like in my experience in running campaigns, one thing I didn't even know I was doing until one of my players, who was also a GM, noted it and then stole it. He said, I do cutscenes. So a lot of
Brad does
times
cutscenes too.
Yeah, like I'll do a session, and I'll end the session with just telling a scene that's happening somewhere else in the world.
Mm.
And the players don't know about it. But at the end of that session, once you've laid those breadcrumbs, like everybody's saying, they want to know what happens. They want to know what happens with it next. Like a comparison I like to draw is Supernatural. The beginning of every season of Supernatural is the world is about to end. And the end of every season of Supernatural is the world maybe is saved.
Yeah.
And the show's been on for like 10 seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the same thing though. Like it's a bit like how I think a lot of us we know the beginning and the end of our campaigns, but the middle is just up to what happens, and keeping that investment from your players. I think, these are all good ideas. Having them go through their own separate character arcs so they understand their characters, fleshing out things with them, having like little mysteries and plot twists happen is always good as well. Suddenly coming up with, even if you invent it and it wasn't a planned thing, but the wizard was the king, or something like that. And then that's like, that guy this whole time, let's find out more about that thing, invest in time into finding out about this particular plot twist. Mystery box technique of which PB does really, really well. Of just like, I have to know the answer to this question. You've posed this really weird question, or this item is interesting but has a strange origin, or my character hears something from another plane. How do I get to that plane to find out what this is? Just peppering the landscape as you play with questions, mysteries, and plot twists, I think, are a good way to just keep attention and investment.
Yeah,
and I like investment as an accountant. I'm not.
Yeah, excellent. I don't never be afraid to end on a cliffhanger either. Like
cliffhangers are awesome.
Yeah, every episode should be a
every
cliffhanger.
episode for me is a cliffhanger. If it's not, I'm like, I failed. I failed and I quit. It's over.
Nothing feels better than ending your session and have all your players go, "Daw!"
Yeah. We did just 5 more minutes, Dad.
Yeah, right. Like that's really cool. Never be afraid to end on those, and also never be afraid to change direction either. Like there's a couple times, even when in doing the show, where I'll set up a story or I'll set up an antagonist, and it's just not landing. Like it's not catching with the players, it's not catching with the audience, it's just not going anywhere. So I'll do something to shake it up. I'll do something to change it up in the middle. Be conscious of when you're losing your hook in the narrative, and don't be afraid to change directions, switch gear completely, add a new antagonist, add a new story twist, kill an NPC, whatever you got to do, right? Like it's don't be afraid to shake things up every now and then. All right. Oh God, I can go way back now. Okay. Have you found it hard to deal with or move forward from the death of a character?
Oh.
PC or NPC? I'm guessing PC.
I'm guessing PC too.
All right. It doesn't say, but we're going to go with that. Let's go
Oh,
with PC.
Yes, I think if you're answering no, then you're not telling a story with a group of people that you care about. Like, I think it's hard for everybody, but sometimes it happens, and sometimes the best stories are told when something tragic like that happens. You know, like it happens sometimes, but I think your players will know you're not doing it on purpose. You're not doing the GM versus the player mentality where like, yeah, you know, your character's dead and I'm happy about it. You know,
Yeah.
I've had player characters die and we're all crying. I'm crying. It's just like it's sad for everybody, but we all walk away going, that was awesome. Also, that was like, what a crazy way for that story, for that character to end. I don't know. I think, yeah, of course it's hard.
It's like I think it's always going to be hard to move on from it because when you kill a player character or an NPC, like you have to make it mean something. You can't just, I mean, if it happens and it didn't mean anything, you didn't do it right.
I was going to say, I think that's a bit more present in D&D specifically, where characters can just suddenly die.
Yeah.
You're just in a fight or an encounter is too hard and you didn't, you know, and then you've got your death saves and then that's it, right? Whereas everything else I think I've encountered at my table is usually a narrative death. So everybody sees it coming sort of and is a little bit prepared. Emotions are high and a player is choosing to like do something, you know, like I want to do this to hopefully save everybody or something. So
I requested recently that my characters just die of old age.
yeah, you did.
In PB's thing. I was like, no one just dies of old age.
Can
my
I
character's
just-
really old and I just want him to just like die.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, okay.
So my character
Yes,
just
and-
died of old age.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think player death is player death again. My God, get the shovel. Player character death is really hard to deal with. It's always the most interesting thing to watch, though. I'll say that much about it. When you're a viewer and it's really down to the wire with one of these character deaths, it's sometimes like the most interesting thing to watch. And then on the other side of the screen, you're all sitting there going, oh God. And if you're the GM, you just feel racked with guilt. Maybe that's just me, but I'm like, oh God, I have to kill them. And I also have to remain relatively straight-faced and still continue to be like facilitating the rest of the world that's going on. But, you know, everyone's freaking out and stuff like that. It's definitely hard to move on. And it's really hard to do when your players don't want the character to die, but you don't really see any option, you know, and it's happening, and then you have to kind of be like, oh, here's a blank character sheet, do another thing, and then they've got to start from fresh. You are aware that they have to start with a new character at the next session, and all the other players are these like entrenched characters that have been going for a while. There's a lot of stuff to it that I think is really difficult to deal with, but I will say that it's almost always something that people remember really well. Whenever, like, once all that kind of heightened emotion and that sadness or even resentment or awkwardness even happens, like years later on, everyone always remembers how awesome that moment was, or everyone that remembers the moment at least. And that's a thing, you know, you've created a very unique and poignant memory, which hopefully isn't just trauma, you know, and it is something that you're like, that was a really interesting turning point in our story. And that was an interesting thing to have happened. And the ripple effect that had on the campaign from that point. And sometimes it builds other characters. When they lose a beloved character, you suddenly notice that the other characters have grown massively. They've come into this because they're having to deal with it in character almost. They then have to process this loss of a character and what that brought to the group and deal with their own grief in character, and it grows them. So it's always, I find, a really difficult thing to do, but also always very memorable. You know, very like if nothing else, it's almost always very memorable. If it isn't done for laughs or it isn't something that you've facilitated on purpose, I guess.
All right. Well, looks like things are starting to die down. I think it's time for a draw, and we can all get on with our weekends. Thank you so much to all these incredible people that hung out with me on this panel, and all of you guys in the audience to bestow their sage-like wisdom. I know I learned a ton today from everybody here. And I would like Brad to be my new best friend, personally.
It's gonna cost you.
It's just going to make a terrible joke.
Money. All of my friends have to pay tithe.
Five what? Like
Yeah, five. What you got? What are you offering? Do this now.
Do you bits of string? Do you accept bits of string?
I
Give
absolutely
him 5 of your
accept-
Dragon Balls.
Okay.
I'll take 5 Dragon Balls. That saves me a
you
lot
can't
of work.
separate the Dragon Balls. You know this.
I know, I'm trying to depower you. Hi, everyone. Jonathan, the producer here. Just a few quick notes while Puck polls our drawing winner. One, thank you to our sponsor, Hero Forge. The winner of the drawing will be getting a $35 gift card, and that is enough to get you at least one printed mini sent to you. Possibly two. I'd have to double check, because during Gen Con, there's $5 off with the code GenCon 2020 at checkout. And we like to see how many people we're sending over there. So if you want to use bit.ly/mercforge to get over there so we can keep track of y'all, that'd be fantastic. Also, don't forget to join us tomorrow for another sponsored panel that will include folks from Rivals of Waterdeep, The Unexpectables, Guy Sklanders from How to Be a Great GM, and Kat Kruger from D20 Dames. So that proves to be another fantastic show. And if you want to see Puck play live, check in tomorrow night on the World Anvil Twitch channel. He's going to be playing a game of Through the Breach with Weird Games' official kind of Gen Con debut of that. So
Yes.
Please give us that follow. Check us out on YouTube. And let's see who the winner is.
All right, but the character I'm going to be playing tomorrow is named Coop Leroy, and it is 2 references. And anybody who guesses the references wins 1,000 internet points. But
one of them is that you're running into danger unneeded without the party. Oh, okay, I'm out.
Close. No. All right, so I have rolled the dice based on redeemed tickets, and the lucky winner is number 58, T. McLean. So congratulations to T. McLean. It looks like I can reach out to you straight through that, so we're going to send you a message and get you this Hero Forge gift certificate. Congratulations. Again, thank you to all these incredible people. I'll be honest, I was a little intimidated coming into this with all these like popular and talented people that I was going to officiate over in what my frustratingly casual capacity. But I'm glad that you guys all came out. I think we had really interesting panel. Really good ideas and just incredible expertise on display. So big round of applause for everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
that's it for the panel today. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to tune in for the other stuff. And I mean, if you want to hang around for our show on Sunday and Monday. We got some cool stuff going on. If you like goth weddings, you're going to love it. And until next time, I guess class dismissed.
It's a skeleton and zombie and a gold and a ghast and a vampire saw. So Edwin Ardua, paladin blameless, found the undead band who were becoming famous. Wing Wong Wombi, it's a skeleton and zombie and a ghoul and a ghast.